That looks pretty sketchy, Lisa. There's a lot of water here. I don't know.
It's water and slush and ice.
Holy crap.
This is kind of a long lake.
I think it's a river.
Is it a river? Oh, it is a river.
For years, millions enjoyed the grit, tension, and unforgettable close calls on ice road truckers. But behind the scenes, there were devastating realities most people never knew. From about 10 ice road truckers cast you never figured out. Daryl Ward. Daryl Ward showed up to Ice Road Truckers in Season 6, and it didn't take long before fans decided he was their guy. He came in with 31 years of trucking already behind him, logging roads, long hauls, all of it, and he walked onto that show like he had been doing it his whole life, because, in a lot of ways, he had. Back home in Montana, he'd spend his off-seasons hauling logs and helping fight forest fires. That's just who he was. Any road, any load wasn't a catchphrase for Daryl. It was a pretty accurate summary of how he moved through life. His longtime friend Chuck Campbell once said that knowing Daryl Ward was an honor he would carry forever, and that the man made everyone around him feel like they mattered. He helped out fellow truckers who were stuck, volunteered to fight forest fires near his home in Montana, and was completely devoted to his kids and grandkids. He was the kind of man communities are built around. Then, on August 28, 2016, everything changed. Daryl had just finished up at the Great American Truck Show in Dallas, where he'd spent the day hanging out with fans. He and pilot Mark Melotz boarded a Cessna 182 Skylane out of Missoula, heading toward a small private airstrip near Clinton, Montana. Witnesses on the ground said the approach looked totally normal. The plane was stable, the weather wasn't the problem, nothing looked off. But then, at about 40 feet above the runway, the plane made a sharp, sudden 90-degree turn to the right, hit a line of trees, and went down. Both Daryl and Mark died. He was 52 years old. The National Transportation Safety Board investigated the crash, but ultimately, they couldn't even determine a cause, ruling it simply as a sudden right turn for reasons that could not be determined. With no real answers to give, the trucking world was left to process the shock on its own. The History Channel dedicated the rest of Season 10 to his memory, starting with Episode 5, while fans built memorials online to honor the driver they'd lost. The Montana trucking community lost one of its own, a guy who had survived a decade of ice roads, who had driven loads that would make most people walk away from the whole profession, was gone on a clear day in his home state. On a short flight he'd probably taken 100 times. His story is the one that set the tone for this whole list. But the next driver's loss didn't come with flashing lights or a news report. It came quietly, after the cameras had long since gone dark. Gerald Swenson, Ollie Bear. Gerald Swenson didn't need a nickname to get your attention, but Ollie Bear fit him well enough that it stuck. He came onto the show in Season 2, running loads on the Tuktoyaktuk Winter Road up in Canada's Northwest Territories. He was 59 at the time, with 6 years of ice road experience on top of a lifetime of logging work before that. What made Ollie Bear stand out wasn't drama or conflict. It was reliability. While other drivers were dealing with breakdowns and near disasters, Bear was out there getting the job done. He just loaded up and drove, and when the season wrapped, he had completed 63 loads and moved over 4 million pounds of cargo. More than any other main driver that season. Nobody made a big deal out of it, and Bear certainly didn't. Off camera, Bear was just as consistent. He was known around Revelstoke and Vernon in British Columbia for meeting up with friends for coffee every single day. He was the guy you could count on, the guy who showed up, the guy who kept things together. His family, his community, his friends, they all knew a man of deep character. On December 11th, 2022, Gerald Bear Swenson passed away at 74 years old of complications related to cancer. His kids, grandkids, and siblings survived him, and the people who knew him from those tuk-toyak-tuk runs carried the kind of grief that doesn't make headlines, but sits heavy all the same. The ice roads he drove don't exist anymore. That route is a paved highway now, but the loads he hauled across them were real, and so was the man who hauled them. However, not every loss comes from a crash or a crime. Sometimes the road just outlasts the people who loved it most. The next story, though, that one hit the trucking world suddenly and hard. Jack McKahan, Cactus Jack. Before Alex Debogorski became the legend fans knew across 11 seasons, he had people around him on the Dalton Highway who helped him figure out how to survive it. Jack McKahan was one of those people. He drove the haul road for years before the cameras showed up, and when they did, he was already the kind of veteran who other veterans listened to. Jack Jesse's wife, Judy, described him as a hard-working trucker with a great sense of humor who was simply a joy to be around. Also, Lisa Kelly, who knew the Dalton Highway as well as anyone, called him a true pro. And when those two say something like that, it means something. On October 15, 2014, the news came through that Jack had been in a serious crash on the haul road. Lisa Kelly, who had known him from their years on the show together, took to social media to keep fans updated. For a while, there was hope. By October 24th, she was telling people he was steadily getting better, even awake at times, and asking fans to keep praying. But the road had done its damage, and although it felt like he might pull through, he didn't. On November 26, 2014, Lisa confirmed on Facebook that Jack McKahan was gone. He was 80 years old. Jack Jesse also posted a tribute the next day saying everybody loved Jack. And the way he wrote it, you could tell he meant that literally, not as a thing people say at funerals. He was buried with a reputation that nobody questioned and a legacy on that highway that ran decades deeper than any TV season. Hugh Roland, Polar Bear. You couldn't really talk about ice road truckers without eventually landing on Hugh Roland. He was known as Polar Bear, and from the very first episode in 2007, he was there. Rough around the edges, loud, stubborn, and completely at home in conditions that sent other people packing. Fans either loved him or couldn't stand him, and either way, they kept watching. For 8 seasons, he ran his own trucks, his own crew, his own way, and nobody on that show commanded the screen quite like the Polar Bear when he was in his element. But in 2014, Hugh's career came crashing down in a way nobody saw coming. While on location for the show, Hugh was riding as a passenger in a pickup truck, being driven by producer Will Morrison. Morrison lost control, veered off a Canadian road, and slammed into a line of trees. Hugh was seriously injured in the crash, suffering severe damage to the lower half of his body that ended his trucking career. He filed a lawsuit against Morrison and the production company, alleging reckless driving. And when the details came out publicly, they were hard to read, not just because of the physical damage, but because of what it had done to him and his wife personally. His ability to work was gone. Parts of his marriage that mattered to both of them were gone too. All of it from a vehicle he wasn't even driving, on a regular road, and on what should have been an ordinary day. Hugh never came back to the show after that. The show moved into season 9 and kept going, but the polar bear was gone. He later wrote a book about his experiences, but the chapter he never wanted to write was the one where the road took him down before he was ready to leave. Hugh's whole identity was tied to those trucks, and a back road in Canada took it from him in seconds. For the next name on this list, what came for him wasn't sudden at all. It crept up over years and then swallowed everything at once. Alex Debogorski. There is no other cast member in the entire run of Ice Road Truckers like Alex Debogorski. He was in every single season, all 11 of them, from the pilot episode in 2007 to the series finale in 2017. He was the storyteller, the philosopher, the guy who could make you laugh and then hit you with something so real it stayed with you for days. Born in Berwyn, Alberta, raised on a farm, Alex came up hard and carved out a life on the ice roads through sheer determination. He was a devoted Catholic, a husband of over 50 years, and a father of 11 children. When his son, Andrew, was diagnosed with ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, in 2017, Alex didn't slow down. He kept driving. He kept raising awareness. And he kept showing up for his family the only way he knew how. Then, in January 2019, Andrew died in a house fire at his home in Yellowknife. He was 32 years old. His wife and children survived because Andrew, even with his lungs already weakened by ALS, prioritized getting them out first. Alex told reporters through tears that it was God's will and that people from across the Northwest Territories and around the world had reached out with condolences. A GoFundMe for Andrew's family raised over $26,000 in just days. Alex himself is still alive, still trucking, still the legend he has always been. But there's a version of Alex Debogorski that existed before January 2019 and a version after it. And anyone who has lost a child knows that gap doesn't close. He carried loads across frozen lakes for decades, but losing his son was the weight nothing could have prepared him for. Alex kept going because that's what he does. Lisa Kelly. When Lisa Kelly first showed up on Ice Road Truckers, she walked into a world that was almost entirely male. One that was brutal, unforgiving, and built on the idea that only a certain kind of person could survive it. But she proved all of that wrong, season after season, with skill and consistency that earned the respect of every driver she worked alongside. From season 3 through the final season 11, she was one of the most recognizable faces on the show, and the fans loved her for it. Every season brought close calls, trucks sliding toward cliffs on black ice, whiteout storms with zero visibility, loads that pushed the limits of what any vehicle should carry on a frozen road. And she handled it. Not effortlessly. She'd be the first to tell you it was hard, but she handled it, season after season. And fans kept watching because she made it look like it was possible to survive that job if you were smart enough and tough enough and paid attention. What the show didn't really get into was what it costs to live like that for years, the mental weight of it, and the way danger follows you home, whether you want it to or not. However, Lisa eventually stepped back from the show's brutal grind to take control of her own career. She and her husband Travis settled into Alaska, where she took the leap and started her own business, Arctic Fox Trucking. From then on, she was running long hauls between Kenai and Prudhoe Bay entirely on her own terms, choosing her own schedule and her own conditions. It wasn't a permanent exit from the spotlight, though. When the show came back for season 12, Lisa made a major return to television. But this time, everything was different. She wasn't just driving for a paycheck anymore. She was braving the frozen roads of northern Canada, hauling high-stakes loads for Muskie Creek, and answering to absolutely nobody but herself. Our next driver also tried to do the same, but the road had different ideas, and then grief found him before he could outrun it. Reno Ward. When Daryl Ward tragically died in a plane crash in 2016, he left a massive void on the ice roads, and an even bigger one in his family. But the show had to keep moving, and that's when his son, Reno Ward, stepped into the frame. Only around 26 years old at the time, Reno wasn't just taking on some of the most dangerous driving conditions in the world, he was carrying the heavy emotional weight of his father's legacy. In Season 10, he teamed up with his dad's old driving partner, Lisa Kelly, to finish the routes Daryl never got to complete. Watching Reno on screen was heartbreaking. He didn't put on an act for the cameras. You could see the raw grief in his face, but you could also see the grit he inherited from his dad. Driving those frozen paths wasn't just a job for Reno. It was a way to stay connected to a father he had just lost. He survived the season and honorably finished the work. But the emotional toll of driving in his dead father's tracks was a burden no 26-year-old should have to carry. He eventually stepped away from the reality TV spotlight, choosing to keep his father's memory alive, away from the noise of the cameras. Reno faced his grief head-on out in the freezing cold. But what happens when your time on the ice becomes the most talked-about story in the show's history for all the wrong reasons? Art Burke. Art Burke spent the first part of his time on ice road truckers, making people not like him very much. He showed up in Season 7 with a sharp tongue and a chip on his shoulder, and it took a while before fans warmed up to him. But then, the moment his front wheels broke through the ice, everything changed. While the truck was sinking, Art's very first instinct wasn't to save himself. It was to make sure his cameraman got to safety. That single moment completely turned the audience around. After that, fans were entirely his. He drove hard, spoke his mind, and never backed down from a challenge. He stayed through the show's final season in 2017 and left with the respect of the people who mattered most to him. Then things went sideways in a way that had nothing to do with frozen lakes. In November 2018, Art was inside his apartment in Yellowknife trying to make a cannabis concentrate called shatter, a process that requires liquid butane. If you know anything about butane, you know exactly where this is going. The resulting explosion was massive. It blew the bathroom door clean off its hinges and literally lifted the ceiling of the building. Art spent 12 days in the hospital, with severe burns covering 40% of his body. The structural damage to the building topped $60,000, and, in Art's own words, in one heartbeat, everything I worked for vanished. In 2020, he pleaded guilty to arson by negligence and was sentenced to 18 months of house arrest. The court did allow him to serve some of that time inside his truck cab so he could keep working, but the savings and retirement he'd spent a lifetime building were completely gone. He was in his mid-60s, physically scarred, and starting over from absolute zero. Maya Sieber. Maya Sieber had already put in 3 years driving an 18-wheeler through the chaotic streets of New York City before she ever touched a frozen highway, which is its own kind of masterclass in handling high-stress environments. She joined the cast in Season 5 as one of the very few women to ever feature on the show, and the expectations on her were intense from day one. In an industry built entirely by and for men, she had to be sharper, tougher, and less visibly shaken than anyone else, and most of the time, she completely pulled it off. But one specific moment from her season still stands out to fans. In one of the most terrifying moments of her time on the show, Maya lost control of her truck on black ice. The massive rig slid, completely out of her hands, with nothing between her and disaster but whatever the road decided to do next. she managed to stop it. For the viewers at home, it was a moment of pure panic. And for Maya, it was just another close call on a list that was getting dangerously long. Eventually, the math stops working in her favor. Maya decided to step away from the reality TV series after that season, trading the constant spotlight for a return to local hauling back east. The physical danger of the ice road was real and heavily documented, but Maya proved that knowing when you've had enough of the entertainment business is its own kind of strength. She conquered the ice, kept her dignity intact, and walked away on her own 2 feet to keep trucking on her own terms. But here's the most shocking story on this list, and it had absolutely nothing to do with the danger of the road. Timothy Zickuhr. Timothy Zickuhr didn't actually appear on the main series. He came in through the spin-off, IRT Deadliest Roads, where the already extreme premise of the show was pushed to the absolute limit on crumbling mountain passes and sheer cliff drops in India. He brought a wild, aggressive, and bold energy to the screen that made him instantly memorable to anyone who watched that season. The cameras loved his chaotic personality, and viewers certainly remembered him. But the story that would permanently tie itself to Timothy's name had nothing to do with a truck, a blizzard, or a dangerous road. In 2015, Timothy was arrested in Las Vegas on incredibly severe felony charges of kidnapping and extortion. Prosecutors detailed a dark incident where Timothy held a woman captive, locking her in a closet and beating her after accusing her of stealing money from him. He forced her to call someone who could bail her out with cash, but the person she ended up calling was actually an undercover police officer she knew. The cop lured Timothy into a trap, and the arrest was made. Investigators later tied him to the robbery and assault of an elderly woman as well, using personal items he accidentally left behind at the scene. At trial, Timothy Zickuhr was convicted and sentenced to serve between 5 and 15 years in a state prison. No mechanical failure, no whiteout storm, no cracking ice brought him down. Just his own dark choices. The road didn't come for Timothy. He came for himself, and his fall stands as perhaps the most shocking footnote in the entire history of ice road truckers. Out of every single story on this list, the tragic plane crashes, the fires, the injuries, and the heavy grief, this is by far the hardest to sit with, because it's the only one where you can't look at bad luck or terrible circumstances and find any comfort at all. So, which of these stories hit you the hardest? Was it the ones the road took, or the ones who fell apart away from it? And looking back at the whole run of this show, do you think fans ever really understood the price these drivers were paying just to give us something to watch on Tuesday nights? Tell us in the comments. If this video moved you, hit that subscribe button right now, give this video a like, and click the next story on your screen to keep watching. See you next time.